My name is Qley Lewis, 34, and I used to be married to Mark. 8 years. 8 years of laughter, shared meals, promises whispered in the dark, and slowly, silently, a weight pressing on my chest I couldn't name, until he finally gave it a name. It was a Wednesday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the faint hum of the refrigerator mixing with the half-empty wine glass in front of me. Mark had just come home from his boutique fitness class, dressed in one of those expensive athleisure outfits that always made him look like he belonged in a magazine. He didn't even sit. He just leaned against the counter, phone in hand, scrolling with that same impatient expression I had learned to dread. "You're not the woman I married," he said casually, like tossing a napkin into the trash. I froze. The words didn't land in my ears first. They landed somewhere deeper, inside me, where years of quiet compromises and subtle belittling had accumulated. My mouth opened, closed, opened again. I wanted to ask why. What exactly do you mean? But instead, I just stared at the cheap tile floor, wondering how we got here. "You've settled," Mark continued, his voice smooth, almost teasing. "Look at Bethy's husband. He made partner. Bought a lake house. Meanwhile, you're still here, doing the same marketing work you had when we met, living in the same apartment, driving the same..." I flinched at the words, at the familiar sting of comparison. My inner monologue churned, slow and bitter. Am I really nothing to him now, after everything? I swallowed. "I work hard, Mark. You know that." "Hard? Sure," he said, scrolling again, ignoring me completely. "But you used to talk about ambition, dreams, remember? Starting your own thing, creating something people admired. Now you just clock in, clock out. It's pathetic, Qley." Pathetic. The word hit me like a punch. I set my wine glass down harder than intended, the liquid sloshing toward the rim. For a second, I felt rage flare up, red and raw, but it was undercut immediately by exhaustion. 8 years. 8 years of being told I wasn't enough, of shrinking myself to make him feel bigger. And now, in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized something. I had stopped shrinking. Not yet visibly, but inside a spark was igniting. "What brought this on?" I asked, voice measured but trembling. He gestured at his phone like it was the evidence of my failures. "Mistake number 1, engaging with people who are actually ambitious. Look at your friends. Look at Bethy. They're moving forward. You're still here, comfortable, mediocre. Comfortable, mediocre." I let the words wash over me, and then, for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I didn't defend. I just listened. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Not that I was mediocre, but that I had settled. I had spent so long trying to make him happy that I forgot what it meant to make myself happy. "You're filing divorce?" I asked quietly, almost to myself, more of a thought than a question. He blinked, the smirk fading slightly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said. My voice had a calm undercurrent I hadn't expected. "I'm done shrinking, done trying to meet impossible standards." For the first time, Mark looked unsettled. His smugness, his effortless superiority, faltered. I felt a small thrill at the power I'd reclaimed simply by saying the words, saying no more. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I slept on the spare bedroom mattress, feeling the unfamiliar lightness of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of Mark's disappointment. Rock bottom, I realized, wasn't the end. It was the foundation. I could feel it beneath me. Solid, patient, waiting. 3 weeks later, I filed the divorce. Online, straightforward, uncomplicated. No drama, no theatrics, no unnecessary explanations. I was 34, single, with a decent salary and no kids, and the entire world felt like it could belong to me if I chose. For the first time, I chose me. The first week post-filing was like emerging from a fog. I reconnected with former colleagues tentatively at first. A freelance audit project here, a marketing consultation there. Each yes they gave me was like a quiet applause for the me I had buried under Mark's constant comparisons. I joined a regular gym, not some boutique, pretentious place, but a place with weights, treadmills, and mirrors. I showed up at 5:30 a.m., alone at first, but gradually proud of each drop of sweat and every pound lifted. I didn't need Mark to notice. I didn't want him to. Week 3, I opened a business checking account, registered my own LLC, bought a logo on Fiverr for $50. Every small step was mine, unapologetically. Each step whispered, "You are enough. You always were." Mark naturally found out. He called once, then texted, and I ignored everything. My lawyer handled the filings, the paperwork, the minimum necessary contact. I blocked his number. I was not going back. By month 2, my consultancy picked up. My former employer needed a marketing overhaul. I threw myself into the project, rediscovering the exhilaration of creativity and competence. The exhaustion was nothing compared to the thrill of proving to myself, not Mark, that I was capable, intelligent, ambitious. I started therapy, twice a month, $120 sessions that felt like deposits into my soul, money well spent. I unpacked 8 years of subtle manipulation, comparisons, and criticism. I learned how much I had shrunk myself to fit a mold that wasn't mine. Month 3, I bought clothes that actually fit. I bought shoes that didn't pinch. I bought confidence in inches and pounds lost at the gym. My clients started referring me to others. My phone buzzed constantly, not with Mark's complaints, but with opportunities. And through it all, the inner monologue never stopped. I am Qley Lewis. I am enough. I am ambitious. I am not shrinking anymore, and I will never shrink for anyone ever again. The first chapter of my freedom was quiet, almost ordinary. Grocery runs, client meetings, gym sessions. But underneath, a storm of empowerment was brewing, slow and unstoppable. And I knew, deep down, that the next time Mark saw me, I wouldn't be the woman he thought he married. I'd be someone else entirely. Someone strong, someone free. 3 weeks after that fateful kitchen confrontation, I, Qley Lewis, 34, was finally ready to act. The divorce wasn't a whim. It was a long, simmering realization, a quiet accumulation of years spent trying to be someone I wasn't. I remember sitting at my laptop, the legal form staring back at me like a challenge. Filing online seemed almost too simple. No lawyers speaking over me, no mediators dissecting every word. Just me, my choices, and a few clicks separating the life I had from the life I was about to reclaim. I hesitated for a heartbeat, not because I doubted myself, but because I finally understood the gravity of the step. This is irreversible. And yet, a strange calm settled over me. Relief, at last, mingled with fear. It was terrifying to imagine life outside the cage I'd unknowingly built for myself. But even the fear felt empowering. It meant I was alive again. I spent the next few days navigating the emotional fallout. Friends noticed a difference immediately. I stopped replying to Mark's occasional concerned texts. I refused his subtle digs at my independence. I stopped shrinking in the conversations, in the coffee dates, in the quiet dinners we used to have. My body, once bent under invisible pressure, was slowly uncoiling. Small victories piled up. I dusted off old professional connections I'd abandoned for comfort. Former colleagues responded with enthusiasm, freelance audits, consultations, project advice. Each yes felt like applause for the woman I had been hiding for years. Gym sessions became a ritual, not for Mark, not for anyone, just for me. The first week, I could barely run a mile without gasping. By the second, I was lifting weights heavier than I had thought possible. Each drop of sweat was a small, silent declaration. I am reclaiming my body, my energy, my life. And then came the internal shift. I began to notice small things I hadn't before, the way the sunlight hit my apartment in the morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the rhythm of my own breathing. Life was ordinary, but extraordinary in its ordinariness. It reminded me that I'd been living in a haze of Mark's criticisms for so long that I'd forgotten how to feel alive in simple moments. Money, which had always been a point of contention in our marriage, became a tool of freedom. Filing was straightforward, no shared assets of consequence, no complicated financial entanglements beyond a few bills, and the month-to-month lease in my name. I had savings, modest but enough. Mark had always complained about my choices. Why do you spend on yourself when you could save? I realized, as I clicked submit on the divorce filing, that every dollar I had ever spent on myself was a deposit into my future freedom. Friends started noticing the change too. My best friend, Tyler, called one evening. "You sound lighter," he said. I laughed quietly. Lighter. That's exactly it. I am lighter, I admitted, like I can finally breathe again. Tyler didn't pry. He didn't need to. He had watched me shrink and grow for years, silently cheering me on from the sidelines. Work, which had once felt stagnant, began to pick up momentum. I took on small freelance projects, brushing off Mark's passive-aggressive comments. Don't work too hard. You might start liking independence too much. Each project completed was a quiet act of defiance and affirmation. I also began reconnecting with pieces of myself that had been buried, hobbies, dreams, ideas for the future I'd abandoned for comfort. I read books, journals filled with plans, sketches of businesses I had once dreamed of launching. They were reminders of the ambitious Qley I used to be, and the ambitious Qley I could still become. Therapy started that month. Twice a month, $120 sessions, but invaluable. I unpacked 8 years of subtle manipulation, of comparisons and criticisms, of feeling invisible in the person who was supposed to be my partner. My therapist, Dr. Mendez, didn't give me pat answers. She asked the hard questions. Why did you let yourself shrink? When did you stop believing in yourself? What do you want now? Those sessions became a mirror. I saw the patterns, the slow erosion of my self-worth, and for the first time I didn't feel guilty about wanting something more. Not for Mark, not for anyone. I started small changes at home. Closet reorganized, gym bag packed nightly, healthy food prepared, little rituals to reinforce the person I was becoming. Mark didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't care, but that didn't matter. These victories were mine. By the end of month 2, I had my first significant consulting client. The project required full attention, long hours, but it was mine, earned with skill, not borrowed from anyone's approval. I stayed late nights, pored over spreadsheets, developed strategies, and for the first time in years, felt proud not because Mark might notice, but because I was capable. Every milestone, no matter how small, carried emotional weight, paying my own bills without complaint, booking the first project, feeling the calluses develop on my hands from the gym. Each was a piece of armor against the woman I had been under Mark's gaze. And yet, there were shadows. Sometimes, when my phone buzzed with a project notification, I caught a glimpse of Mark's name in my memory. A pang of guilt, quickly silenced. Not my responsibility anymore. I repeated it like a mantra, over and over, until the words became truth. Evenings became reflective. I wrote in my journal, not about Mark, but about myself. I am Qley Lewis, I would write. I am enough, I am ambitious, I am free. The repetition helped, cemented the idea that my life, my choices, and my happiness were mine to own. By the 3rd week post-filing, a small but undeniable shift had taken place. I looked in the mirror and recognized her. Qley, not the woman Mark criticized, not the one who bent under comparisons. She had fire, ambition, and clarity. She was not yet fully formed, but the edges of her independence were sharp and promising. I didn't know what this next months would hold. Business opportunities, personal growth, new friendships, perhaps even a future love. But one thing was certain. The Qley that left Mark's apartment that day was no longer shrinking, no longer afraid, and no longer waiting for validation from the man who had once defined her worth. For the first time, the possibilities were endless. By the start of month 3, I, Qley Lewis, 34, was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. Filing for divorce had been the first step, but now came the work of building something lasting. A life of my own, driven by my ambition, not constrained by Mark's criticisms. I opened a business checking account that morning. My modest LLC, Foster Consulting Solutions, finally had a proper home in the financial world. It cost me only $200 to register, but the act itself felt monumental. A logo designed, a website up, and a professional email. It was mine. Every client inquiry that came through that inbox felt like a handshake with freedom. The first major consulting project hit almost immediately. A former colleague needed a complete security overhaul for a mid-sized company. $15,000. 3 weeks of intensive work while still juggling my old part-time hours. Exhausting? Absolutely. Worth it? Undeniably. Each completed task built confidence I didn't realize I had been starving for. I was good at this, better than I remembered. Morning routines became sacred. 5:30 a.m. Alarms, Gym sessions, a quick breakfast, then diving into work with full focus. My body responded, not dramatically like a magazine cover model, but in subtle, satisfying ways. Toned arms, firmer posture, energy that stayed with me through late nights of work. I began buying clothes that fit properly, not designer pieces, but ones that made me feel like the person I was becoming. Confidence was tangible, woven into fabric, muscle, and spine. I started noticing Mark, not in longing, but in observation. Mutual acquaintances whispered updates. He hadn't moved out of the apartment yet, his promotion at work stalled, and he looked tired. It wasn't my responsibility, but part of me silently noted the contrast. The woman he had dismissed as comfortable was now moving forward, visibly, unapologetically. Friends noticed, too. Tyler became my sounding board for ideas, victories, and doubts. "Qley," he said one evening over a bottle of red, "you're not the same person. I don't think Mark realizes what he lost." I laughed. Not at him, but at the truth. I wasn't doing this for Mark to realize anything. I was doing this for myself. But it did feel satisfying to see the difference. By month 4, I had completely transitioned to full-time consulting. I resigned from my part-time role without hesitation. My boss tried to counteroffer. I declined. "I need to do this my way," I said. It felt empowering. The freedom to make decisions without seeking validation was intoxicating. Mark's presence in my world had faded. He had become a background hum, occasionally appearing in messages through mutual friends or professional channels. One of his attempts to contact me professionally arrived in an email from a client he thought I would collaborate with. I responded politely, declining, but providing alternatives. No confrontation, no drama, just boundaries. Financially, I was solid. Every project I completed, every client relationship I nurtured was a deposit into my independence. I could afford a car, a used but pristine Audi A4, half cash, half financed. Mark's friends were probably shocked when word got out. I didn't care. This was my achievement, not a message. Socially, I began to rebuild too. Networking events, casual meetups, and reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with. I met Natalie, a marketing consultant, at a professional mixer. She was funny, intelligent, and supportive without being overbearing. Our conversations felt easy, natural. I realized, for the first time in years, that I could meet someone without shrinking to fit their expectations. Therapy continued, and the sessions became more introspective. Dr. Mendez often asked, "What are you afraid of now that you're free?" And I would think about Mark, not with anger, but with clarity. My fear wasn't about him. It was about myself, the old habits, the lingering doubt, the possibility of slipping back into complacency. But each week, each session, I felt those fears dissolve, replaced with determination. Then came an unexpected development. Vanessa's friend, Bethany, who had always been a mutual acquaintance, reached out. She sent a message that could have been an invitation back into drama, but I carefully curated my response. Professional, polite, distant. I wasn't going to allow past ties to compromise my present growth. It was during these months that I noticed a subtle shift in Mark's world. Mutual friends reported that he was struggling. His career stalled, his energy low, and the woman he once dismissed, me, was no longer waiting in the background. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't want revenge. But it was undeniable. The dynamics had shifted. I had reclaimed space he could no longer occupy. By month 5, my consulting firm was fully operational. I had hired a part-time administrative assistant, brought on a junior consultant, and had recurring clients. Revenue grew steadily, and my confidence grew with it. I began to understand that success wasn't just financial. It was emotional, spiritual, and psychological. I was finally living for myself. Evenings were filled with reflection, exercise, and strategic planning. I wrote lists of goals, both personal and professional. I journaled, sometimes to Dr. Mendez's prompts, sometimes to myself. Each entry reinforced the same truth. I was no longer defined by anyone's criticisms, not Mark's, not my own internalized doubts. I was Qley Lewis, fully present, fully capable, and fully free. By the end of month 6, it was obvious. I was thriving. Life was not just moving forward, it was accelerating. And though Mark occasionally crossed my thoughts, it was with detachment, a recognition that the story we shared was finished. He had been the catalyst, but I was now the architect of my own life. Foreshadowing began to surface. Invitations, professional inquiries, and recognition started to flow naturally toward me. I was building momentum, and the world was taking notice. I felt powerful, not vindictive, not cruel, but undeniably alive. And through it all, I kept a single mantra in mind, whispered nightly in reflection. I am not who I was. I am better. I am free. I am enough. By month 7, my life was unrecognizable in the best possible way. I, Qley Lewis, 34, had grown stronger, more focused, and undeniably independent. Mark, meanwhile, seemed to be struggling in the quiet aftermath of our separation. I heard whispers from mutual acquaintances, stalled projects, missed promotions, and frustration at work. The man who had once criticized me for settling was now confronted with a reality he hadn't anticipated. I was no longer waiting for him. The first direct sign came in the form of a LinkedIn connection request. His profile picture, professional and polished, seemed like an attempt to mirror my own progress. I scrolled through briefly, noting the stark contrast. He had grown quieter, less confident, and visibly frustrated. I didn't accept. I didn't block. I simply archived it. Boundaries were sacred now. Then came the emails, short, carefully worded, professional in tone, but the subtext was clear. Notice me. He attempted to collaborate on a project with a client I had secured independently. My response was polite, detached, and firm. Thank you for the inquiry, Mark. I maintain a policy against projects where personal conflicts may interfere. I'm happy to refer to other consultants. I expected anger. Instead, there was disbelief, a subtle realization that the woman he had dismissed as comfortable was no longer dependent, no longer constrained by him, and no longer defined by his criticisms. It was a silent power that needed no words. The real test came a week later. I was at a local coffee shop working on a proposal, headphones in, immersed in my own world, when I felt a presence across the table. Qley, we need to talk, Mark said, sliding into the seat opposite me. I removed my headphones slowly, observing him. He looked thinner, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. No, Mark, we don't need to talk, I replied, calm and measured. He leaned back, frustration mingled with longing in his eyes. I saw your LinkedIn updates, your business, your growth. I didn't realize. I cut him off. You didn't realize what I could do when I wasn't trying to shrink myself to fit your expectations. I am not here to justify my success to you. That chapter is closed. He winced, the words hitting harder than I expected. There was no malice in my tone, just clarity and finality. For years, he had believed he could control the narrative of my life. Now, the truth was undeniable. I had reclaimed my story. I thought I was pushing you to be better, he said, voice tight. I didn't realize. I was just hurting you. A flicker of pity passed through me, but I hardened quickly. Mark, what you call motivation was manipulation. What you call concern was belittlement. I am free now. I don't need your validation, and I never will again. His gaze softened, a mixture of regret and desire. Can we try again? I see now what I missed. I stood up, gathering my laptop. What you see now is who I am when I'm no longer trying to be enough for you. That's not love, it's independence. You had your chance. He reached out, but I stepped back, firmly maintaining the distance I had worked so hard to claim. I've rebuilt my life, Mark. I've built a business, reclaimed my confidence, and started living for myself. You are not part of that journey anymore. It was surreal, the shift so complete. The woman he once belittled was now the force he hadn't anticipated. I wasn't angry. Anger was a waste of energy. I was simply done. After that encounter, he began appearing more frequently, though subtly, at the gym, near my favorite cafes, occasionally through mutual contacts. Each time I maintained boundaries, polite but firm. I would not allow his attempts to pull me back into the drama to disrupt my growth. Meanwhile, my business flourished. Long-term contracts, client referrals, and successful projects gave me a sense of achievement that had nothing to do with him. Every email sent, every proposal signed, and every project completed reinforced the independence I had fought so hard to reclaim. Therapy sessions continued to fortify my resilience. Dr. Mendez often asked, "Are you responding out of fear, guilt, or desire for closure?" My answer was always the same: none of the above. I am responding out of clarity. I am choosing myself. Even my personal life began to bloom. Natalie, the marketing consultant I met at a networking event, became a consistent source of joy. We laughed, shared ideas, and encouraged each other professionally. There was no shadow of Mark in our interactions. For the first time in years, intimacy was based on mutual respect and admiration, not compromise or fear of criticism. Mark's occasional attempts to re-enter my life, professional inquiries, casual encounters, and messages served only to remind me of the strength I had gained. He realized too late that the woman he had attempted to diminish could thrive without him, and there was no room for reconciliation. I reflected often on the journey, from the kitchen confrontation that sparked liberation, to the small victories at the gym, to the first client contracts, and the quiet empowerment of independence. The contrast between my past and present self was stark. I had gone from shrinking under criticism to standing tall, fully capable, and unapologetically ambitious. And in that transformation lay the ultimate truth. I was not the woman Mark had married. I was better, stronger, free. By month 8, I, Qley Lewis, 34, had fully embraced the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. The divorce was finalized weeks ago, and the clarity of that decision felt like sunlight flooding a room I hadn't known was dark. No arguments, no drawn-out mediations, just clean lines, clear boundaries, and the freedom to live entirely on my terms. Foster Consulting Solutions was thriving. Contracts flowed steadily, revenue climbing beyond what I had dared to imagine in the early weeks. My team had grown modestly, just enough to relieve me of administrative strain, but small enough to preserve the entrepreneurial intimacy I craved. I had a proper office downtown, a 2-bedroom apartment with space for both living and working comfortably. Even the Audi A4, black and sleek, felt like a symbol, not of excess, but of capability. Every inch of my surroundings reminded me this was mine. Mark's sporadic attempts to reach me had dwindled. A message here, an accidental encounter there. Each time I maintained polite detachment. He had realized finally that the woman he had once dismissed was no longer waiting, no longer shrinking herself to accommodate his insecurities. He had seen my progress, and in it, perhaps, a reflection of what he had lost. But that was not my burden to bear. Therapy continued to fortify my inner resilience. Dr. Mendez often asked probing questions. "Are you truly free of resentment, Qley?" I realized that freedom wasn't the absence of anger or regret. It was the reclamation of self. I had taken back my ambition, my confidence, and my right to define my own life. The past, with Mark's criticisms and dismissals, had become a reference point, not a cage. Natalie became a constant, steady presence in my world. Her support wasn't performative. It was genuine, layered with trust, humor, and shared ambitions. With her, I felt fully seen, not as someone needing correction or motivation, but as a whole, capable woman. We shared dinners, brainstorming sessions, and quiet evenings laughing over small victories. The difference from my life with Mark was stark. No belittlement, no comparison, no conditional love. One afternoon, a professional inquiry arrived in my inbox, this time genuine and exciting. A potential client had seen my LinkedIn updates, read testimonials from past projects, and wanted to meet for a high-stakes consultancy contract. I responded promptly, professionally, and with a quiet thrill I hadn't felt in years. The fact that this opportunity had nothing to do with Mark was, ironically, profoundly satisfying. My achievements were mine alone. And yet, even with all this success, a quiet lesson lingered. The words Mark had spoken in that kitchen, "You're not the woman I married," had not ended me. They had catalyzed a transformation. I hadn't just responded with career achievements. I had rebuilt my self-worth from the inside out. Ambition, confidence, and independence were no longer abstract ideas. They were tangible aspects of who I had become. One evening, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The apartment was quiet. Natalie away at a networking event, my assistant wrapping up the day's tasks. I sipped a glass of wine and journaled. I am not who I was. I am better. I am enough. The statement wasn't arrogance. It was truth. I had survived criticism, manipulation, and self-doubt. I had thrived because I stopped seeking validation from someone who would never be satisfied. The final closure came unexpectedly. Mark sent an email, formally inquiring if we could meet to discuss a possible professional collaboration. I read it, paused, and smiled softly. The answer was clear: no. I forwarded it to an associate for advice and closed the tab. My life was full enough. My success was mine. My independence was non-negotiable. I realized then the ultimate truth. We can't control how others perceive us, nor can we make them recognize our worth. What we can do is reclaim ourselves, redefine our value, and refuse to shrink for anyone's convenience. I had done all that and more. By the end of the year, my firm had secured long-term clients, my personal growth had stabilized, and my relationship with Natalie was flourishing. Mark remained a distant figure in the story of my life, a shadow of past limitations that had fueled my ascent. Occasionally, I would hear through friends that he was struggling, but it no longer affected me. My focus was my own growth, my own happiness. Walking through the city streets one evening, the cool air crisp and invigorating, I smiled to myself. The woman who had once allowed criticism to define her was gone. In her place stood Qley Lewis, fully autonomous, ambitious, and free. The life I had imagined, and in some ways feared I could never have, was here, tangible, thriving, and entirely mine. And somewhere deep inside, I whispered a final farewell to the past. You were a necessary chapter, Mark, but this story is mine now. With that, I stepped into my car, drove home, and turned the key in the lock of my apartment that had become a sanctuary, a headquarters, and a symbol of independence. Life was no longer defined by fear, expectation, or comparison. Life was defined by me. And that, above all, was freedom.